Hey everyone, this is Noel with creationeffects.com, and in this After Effects tutorial I'm going to show you how to create a floating glowing orb from scratch, and we're going to make it move around this field. And at the end I'm going to show you how you can quickly add a variety of different particle trails to it so it looks like it's trailing smoke or dust or different abstract shapes. And we'll be using a tool from Creation Effects for that. But the bulk of this tutorial will be showing you how to make this orb. So let's go ahead and get started. We've got some footage here. If I play it back, you can see that it has some camera motion. So let's track this camera motion first. I'm going to open the tracker panel and we'll just click track camera with that layer selected. And then this just takes a few minutes, so you can sing a song or do some gymnastics or whatever you want to do to entertain yourself. All right, I skipped ahead. That didn't take too long. You can see all these different tracking points, which means the footage is tracked. And if we go to this 3D camera tracker effect up here, we can click on Create Camera, and that creates this new 3D camera. If I reveal the keyframes, you can see it's got these position keyframes on every frame. And if I go to top view, I'll zoom out a little bit, and you can see our camera. We're looking down on it, and if I scrub through, you can see it's moving backwards. All right, next let's make a new composition, and we'll just call this Orb Pre-Comp, and this is where we'll build our texture for our orb. Let's first add a new solid layer and make it comp size. I'm using HD resolution. We'll call this orb, and it doesn't matter what color it is. And in my effects and presets, I'm going to search for turbulent noise and add that effect. Turbulent noise is a lot like fractal noise. It's basically identical, but it's newer, so I assume it's better. And in the turbulent noise effect, we can change fractal type to, let's do swirly, and decrease the brightness. We don't need to see that much. Maybe increase the contrast. And then on the evolution property, I'm going to alt click the stopwatch and we'll add a simple expression. Just say time times, we'll do 300. And what that does is it makes the evolution property continuously increase over time. So we've got this evolving texture, kind of like water, I guess. Let's select that turbulent noise effect and duplicate it. So now there's two, and on this one we can set the fractal type to, let's do strings, and we can increase the contrast on that one too. Let's set the blending mode to something different, like difference. Now we can see the other texture behind the strings, so that looks fine. Actually, on the expression for that second one, let's change the speed just to change it up a little bit. We'll do 200. Okay, and next let's add some color correction. I'm going to search for the tritone effect. And for the midtones, we'll set that to a blue color. Next we'll add a CC sphere effect, which makes it into this sphere. And we can adjust the lighting. If you remember in our footage, we have the sun, which is directly above and behind our scene. So we can try to match that. In the CC sphere effect, let's set the angle to 0, and then we'll just adjust the light height till it looks like it's brighter on top. But we still want to see this texture down here. So in shading, we can increase the ambient. And then one final thing in this comp that we'll do is we'll add an expression on the rotation of the CC sphere. So in this section here, you can see that we can rotate the sphere on 3 different axes. And so I'm just going to alt click that stopwatch, and we'll add a wiggle expression. So we'll just write wiggle, and then in parentheses we'll do a speed of 0.8, and an amount of 100 or so. And I'm going to copy that and paste it onto these other rotation properties. All right, that's fine. And I think we're done in this comp. Let's go back to our project panel. All right, now let's take that orb pre-comp that we made and we'll drag that into a new composition. And we'll call this one orb final. And then in that comp, on this orb layer, we're going to add a glow effect. And we can turn down the threshold to something like 30. And the radius, we'll increase that to about 30. And the intensity, that looks about right. And we can leave it at original colors, and all of that's good. All right, let's select that layer and duplicate it. That's Command or Control D. And for that top one, we can set the blending mode to screen, which will let us see the bottom one underneath it. And let's scale down the bottom one to something like 90. Let's do like 85%. So we can see that it looks kind of like there's a smaller one inside the bigger one, but you can't see it very well. Let's add a layer style to that bottom one. Go to Layer and Layer Styles, and we'll add a inner glow. Inside the inner glow, we'll set opacity to 100 and the color, something to match that blue. And then we can just increase the size and we can see a little better now. And maybe we'll make that orb on the inside a little bit darker. I'll just quickly add a hue saturation effect and we'll decrease the lightness a little bit. Okay, so these will be spinning at the same time, but I think it'd look cool if maybe the second one, the inside one, would be spinning a little bit on a delay, as if it were, I don't know, suspended in liquid inside the big orb. So we can do that just by dragging this bottom one over to the left. We'll do it like 4 frames. All right, that's fine. None of this really matters. I probably won't even see that in the final comp, but it looks cool here. And let's also add a CC light rays effect. So we'll put this one on the top, the bigger orb. And we can just drag the center to the middle of our orb and increase the intensity, something like 800, and bring the radius down to about 10. Okay, and just for fun, let's add one more layer. We can kind of give this a glassy look, like a reflection, and we can make it reflect our footage. So I'm going to just drag my footage into this comp, and let's add a CC sphere effect to this one. And let's also add a spherize effect. Spherize. And we'll set the radius to 200 for that too. So you can see without the spherize effect, and with it, it just makes it rounder, more sphery, I think is the technical term. And on that CC sphere effect, let's match the lighting to what we have for our orb. Angle at 0, light height. Oh, light height's fine. Increase the ambient a little bit. And I mean, this is going to be all different for you. You're not going to have this particular shot. Maybe you don't have any footage at all, and that's fine. Okay, we can try that. I'm going to set the blending mode to screen, and no, I'm going to leave it at normal. It'll just bring some of the color from the scene into our orb. Okay, let's close that comp and orb pre-comp. And we'll go back to our main comp and let's just bring that the orb final into there. All right, and because we have these light rays emanating from the orb, I'm worried they're going to be cut off at the edge of the layer here. So I'm going to quickly add a mask, and with the layer selected, I'll double click this circle mask and hit the F key to bring up the feather. Let's do something like 400, and mask expansion, we'll decrease that to about -200, and we'll just hope that that works. And now we can animate this orb to move around our field. So I'm going to hit the P key to bring up the position property, and we want this layer to be 3D. So I'll click that box. I usually like to add my beginning and end keyframes first, and then I'll add the details of the motion path later on. So let me bring it to where I want it to start. It's going to be way back in space here. Let's do something like 60,000 pixels back. And let's have it come from the side of the screen, and it's going to fly up here and zigzag around this road and then come up close to the screen, and then maybe we'll have it exit off here. And we'll just add a position keyframe there, and let's go to the end, and we'll just set all these to 0, and we can actually, I think, bring it closer to the camera. So it's close to the camera, top left. So now let's go to the middle of our animation. We can bring it way over here. And I'll just continue to go to certain points in that path in time and move it to where I want it to be. If you click on any of the vertices and hold down the Alt or Option and Command or Control and then drag, you can adjust these handles to adjust the curve of the motion. All right, in addition to these motion keyframes that I gave it, let's add some random wiggle to it. I'll alt-click the position, and I'm going to type in a wiggle expression. We'll just do 6 times a second. It'll move about 60 pixels. All right, let's see what that looks like. That's okay, and I don't know if I like how dark it is. Let's, I can set this one to screen, but I think that's too bright. We lose all of that dark blue. So let's duplicate it, and the top one we can leave at screen, and the bottom one we can set to normal. And maybe decrease the opacity of the normal one. And decrease the opacity of the other one. I think that looks better. We're seeing double. Oh, it's got a wiggle expression on both. Okay. So we'll make this one our main. We'll delete all those keyframes on the duplicate one. And we'll just pick whip the position of that second one to the first one. Make sure I can see the position property, and I'll just pick whip it to that one, and now wherever this one goes, this one will go. And one other thing I'm going to do, since I'll be adding some light effects to this that are actually 2D, the effects are 2D, and this is a 3D layer. We're going to run into problems linking the 2D effects to the 3D position here. So thinking ahead about that, I'm just going to add a null layer. I'll go to Layer, New, Null Object, and I'm going to make it 3D. I'm going to pick whip the position of that null to the position of our orb. And that's going to make it easier just because of some layer space conversion problems that we'd run into, which I don't even fully understand. So I won't try to explain it to you. You're welcome. All right, now let's add a lens flare effect to this, just to brighten it up and just make it more interesting. Let's go to Layer, and I'll add a new solid and make sure it's black, and we'll call this lens flare. And I'll search for the lens flare effect. I'll set the blending mode to screen. And I hate this one, so we're going to change this to 35mm prime. And let's find the flare center property for that effect, and we're going to add an expression. Remember, this null position is going to drive the position of all of these 2D effects. So we can start by pick whipping it to the position of the null. But we got to doctor this up a little bit. You don't have to understand this. You can just copy what I'm doing. We'll just create a variable p, which equals that null layer. So p equals this comp dot layer null1, which is the name of that null. And then we'll do p dot to comp, p dot anchor point, and that should do it. So you can see the lens flare is now moving with the orb, but it's way too bright. So let's go to flare brightness, and we'll add a keyframe at the beginning of the scene. We'll turn it down to something like 15. And then we'll go to near the end of the scene and we'll move it up to about, I don't know, 110. And let's also add a wiggle expression so that it's not constant, but it's kind of flickering. Let's do 5 times a second. It'll wiggle by amount of 30. And let's add a tritone effect. And we'll change this to a blue color. And if I ever say we need a blue color and I pick a purple color, that's not to confuse you. I'm colorblind and it all just looks like blue to me. So let's just add a nice blue color here. No, I'm just kidding. Not about being colorblind. I am colorblind, but I can totally tell that this is pink. So let's go back and just choose a blue color. Let's see what that looks like. It's too bright. Let's also add an expression to the opacity of that layer. So I typed the E key 2 times fast to bring up the expressions. So these are the properties that we've edited. For the opacity, I'm going to link that to the brightness. And maybe even less than that. We'll divide that by 1.5. So it's always a little bit less than whatever the brightness is. And maybe to let some of that original lens flare color through, we can blend this with the original just a little bit. All right, let's also add an anamorphic lens flare, like a blue horizontal streak. We can go to Layer, New, Solid, and we'll make this orange. I'm just going to add a circle mask right at the center of the layer. So I clicked and dragged first and then held down Alt and Command so that it expands on both sides the same amount. We'll just make a really long, thin circle. And let's add a Gaussian blur. Turn that up a bit. Let's add a directional blur and set the angle to 90 and increase that. Hold down Shift to make it go much further. That should do it. We're going to reveal the position property using the P key, and we don't need to make it a 3D layer. Let's just, because I want it to stay long even when it's way back here. So you can see we have 2D coordinates here because it's just X and Y, and we actually already have some 2D coordinates from the lens flare that we set up. So we can just pick whip this one to that one to the flare center, and that jumps right there. I'm going to rename that to anamorphic flare and set this blending mode to screen. We'll see. Let's link the opacity of the anamorphic flare to the opacity of this lens flare. All right, it's starting to look better, but it still doesn't look like it really belongs in this scene. We should be seeing areas of the environment brighten up as the orb gets close to it. So let's try and do that. Let's add a new adjustment layer and double click the circle icon to make a circular mask, and we'll feather it out something like 600, and then mass expansion to -300, half of whatever the feather was. And let's add a levels effect. And we can start playing with these, and I'm going to try and make it so that just the brightest parts of this grass, like these flowers here, are going to be brighter. So the settings will be different for you. Let's just try this, and I'm going to make this layer 3D, and I'm going to hit the R key to bring up the rotation, and we'll rotate it on the X value 90. We'll do -90, and let's move it down, and let's change this to, we'll see what add does. That might be good. Let's also add some color correction. We'll go to we'll do a tint effect, and we'll map the white to blue, a light blue. And maybe black, we can map it to a really dark blue. I don't know. I'll rename this to ground highlights. And we want this to be positioned directly underneath the orb, no matter where it goes. So we got to do that using an expression. So I'm going to open up a expression box for the position property by alt-clicking there, and then hit the P key for the orb. And what we want to do is match the X position and the Z position, but not the Y position. So let's see. We can just do, I'm going to do value plus, so that takes the current value, whatever we have, and it adds these values. First, let's set this to 0. So for this X value that we're going to add to this current value, I'm going to highlight that and then pick whip the X value of our orb main. And then I'll select the Z value, and I'll pick whip that to the Z value of the orb. All right, so you can see it's directly underneath the orb, and now we can, and it's going to follow it wherever it goes. So we can just move it down manually, because remember, it's taking this current value into account for this expression. So we can, let's go somewhere to where it's close to the ground, and we can decide how close we want that to be. I think maybe it's around there. We're going to have to make this layer much bigger in order to see it. So I'll hit the S key to bring up the scale. And we'll do something like that. And that's too bright, so let's bring it down a bit. I think I want it to be a little more blue. But let's go a step further. I'm going to link the opacity of these highlights to the brightness of the orb. Let's link it to the flare brightness. So I'm going to pick whip it. I'm going to whip it good until it's little hiney as red. I don't like how fast it's going around this corner here. Yeah, let's just change that real quick. First of all, since we move these keyframes around, and you can see if I zoom in here, these little dots here, which represent each frame, its position on that frame, are close together, and then right here, they're spread out. So it's actually changing speeds as soon as it gets to that keyframe. We can fix that by selecting these keyframes and then right click. We'll go to keyframe interpolation, and in the temporal interpolation, we'll change it to continuous Bezier. And then let's go to our graph editor and select position so we can see the curve. And this is on value graph, so we can change this. Click this little button here, and we can do the speed graph. And ideally, all of these should be smooth curves, no right angles or corners. Right here, down here is 0 pixels per second. That's the speed. Obviously, it's going faster up here then, and then slower down here. I want it to really slow down at the end. So I can just bring this down to 0, and I'll pull this handle out. I still didn't change that speedy corner right there. So let's go back to that graph, and we'll just drag that keyframe closer to 0, and that'll slow it down. Try and smooth out our curves. Much better. So we could keep adding stuff and trying to perfect this forever, but I think this is good for the amount of time we put into it. I think it looks pretty good. So that brings us to our the next part of the tutorial, where I was going to show you how to add some cool particle trails to this moving orb. And we can do that with the Wisp template, which is a template from Creation Effects. It lets you add 3D particle trails to any moving 3D object in After Effects. And there's a variety of different shapes and smoke and sparks and fire and dust and all that good stuff. If you click on the link in the description, you can see the demo video of all the stuff I can do. But it basically brings you an affordable alternative to particle effects in After Effects. So I'm going to import that template into this project. I'll go to File, Import. So the entire template is now in this little folder here, and I'll open that up, and I'll open up this Wisp's HD comp. And let me just play that back. So this is the kind of stuff it creates. We can look at some other ones. So there are 50 different wisps in this comp, and they're all, you notice they're all doing this spiral motion, and that's because they're all following this target 1 layer, which is just a 3D layer. If I unhide it, you can see I created this motion path for it. So they're just following that. We can make them follow our orb really easily after we choose which one we want, and I might try a couple different ones, but let's do this light scribble one. This one's a pre-comp, you can see, which means it has multiple layers in there. So I open that up, and these are the layers. Let's just do a preview of what it looks like. So you can see it's got some fairy dust and like some lightning elements to it. I think that one will look nice. So I'm just going to select all of these layers and go back to our orb, and to paste them down at the bottom, I'll select that bottom layer and paste. And now we need to tell it, you can see we got some expression errors. We just need to tell it which layer to follow, which it's going to be this orb main layer. So I'll select each of these layers, and in the Effect Controls panel, the very first control is Target Layer. We're going to set that to Orb Main, and we'll do that for each layer. And every animation is different, so it might not look like you expect as soon as you apply it. But there are lots of customization options on these, and each layer is actually a separate wisp. So here we have the main tail, and that's what that looks like. So you can just select that layer, and then in the Effect Controls panel, you can see we've got a bunch of different options. All of these that say controls, you can affect the look of that. Oftentimes the default settings are perfect. For this animation, I know because I've already tried it, because the orb goes so far back in space, I want to make a few adjustments. Okay, I fast forwarded and because I was making a bunch of changes, I basically just changed the size, the particle size, and the speed of the lightning, just so it would all be more visible. I'm not sure what it's going to look like yet, but we can test it out. Yeah, I'm not crazy about the falling dust there, but that's just one example. You can mix and match multiple wisps. You get the idea. Lots of different looks, easy to apply, and then lots of customization options. And you can do all sorts of cool things with particles and trailing particles in After Effects. I hope you liked the tutorial. If you enjoyed watching that, please subscribe because I plan on doing a lot more tutorials from now on. Also be sure to check out creationeffects.com. We have all sorts of creative visual effects solutions there. If you want flocks of birds to put in your footage, or custom swarms of insects, or schools of fish, we have that. If you want to turn your footage into something else like VHS effects or old film, or lots of different types of art effects, we've got plenty of that. We've got lots of custom animations like 3D books, which you can customize with your own content. 3D oceans, growing flourishes, lots of text effects, and a whole lot more, all for Adobe After Effects. That's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.